Arvin, are people sending screenshots of, them subscribing to the all-in-one package by Safaricom and showing us how much they spent, and then they stand a chance of winning 3,000 shillings? Arvin, yes? No? Yes? Yes, they're doing so. Okay. So keep doing that, because Arvin is going to be picking somebody to win 3,000 shillings at the end of the show today. 3,000 bob. All you need to do is go
*544# from your phone. You will see option number 4, go monthly. You will click on 4, and then you will see all-in-one. All-in-one will give you many options, 500, 1,000, 2,000. The one we wanted to look for is the one for 2,000 shillings. And guess what you get because of that?
Yeah.
1,000 shillings.
1,000 shillings talk time.
1,000 minutes of talk.
Talk minutes.
2,000 SMSs. 17 GB data. Finally got that right. And free WhatsApp. All of this through the 30 days for that amount that you're going to spend. So you know what happens? You will never be talking to me, Eric, and then you will just hear TTT and say, let me call you back, let me top up. I say, no. You don't have to do that. The embarrassment will no longer be at your doorstep. You can send a message and you will not see later, and then people are waiting for you, and then you come back to your phone later and you say, this message did not go. It can never be you. With this all-in-one, it can never be you, my friend.
It sorts you out completely.
Kabisa.
Yeah? Our guest, Dr. Edgar Gidua, you hear that story?
I hear you.
So,
I hear you.
You know that embarrassment of when you're talking to somebody on the phone and you're like, let me call you back.
We've all been there.
Because you're
we've all been there. A crucial call.
Yeah. At that very moment. And you're wondering, okay, so now, how does this portray me? Safaricom says, avoid such small embarrassments, okay? Buy once, the all-in-one package. You spend whatever amount you think you fit in your band, depending on your needs. And once you do that, you get data, you get minutes, you get SMS, you get WhatsApp.
Okay.
Yeah? So you're sorted for 30 days.
Yeah, sounds like a good deal.
Yeah. And then the 30 days again, renew. Buy another one. If you discover, I'd started with 500, and I finished those 500 before the 30 days are over. Yeah. Because there's some things that you may find that you finished, depending on your habits. You may find it's your data that you've malizaed before, or the minutes that you've malizaed before, or the SMSs that there are people who just SMS. Constantly.
Yeah.
You're sorted.
Yeah.
You're sorted. Also remember, very many of these USSD services actually are costing you something on SMS.
Definitely.
Right?
Every time.
So you're thinking 2,000 SMSs, why? How many times do you do start or something?
Yeah. It's true.
That's money.
That's
money. Yeah. So welcome, Dr. Gidua.
Thank you so much.
Good to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
It means that the world has peace.
At least, let's hope so.
Okay.
But not really, yeah. I get you.
Dr. Edgar Gidua is an international relations, peace and conflict researcher and a security analyst. He's our guest because we're talking about what's happening globally. The leaders of the world are converging in New York, our president included, and they are talking about world peace and the future and harmonious coexistence and all those other things that they talk about. The United Nations General Assembly, the 79th edition, is taking place this week in New York. How neutrality can lead to economic and humanitarian crises in Africa. I'll welcome you with today's proverb, courtesy of CT. Today, this week, the proverbs will be from Senegal. Today's proverb, give us your interpretation of it.
Yeah.
It is better to travel alone than with a bad companion. It is better to travel alone than with a bad companion. Kwanza kama unapanda mlima.
No pun intended. Exactly. Yeah, that's a good proverb. It's true because there are people who are vision killers. You have a dream, you have a destiny you want to get to, and if you have the wrong companion, they actually become destiny killers because they keep discouraging you from taking challenges that probably you feel it's time for you to take. They keep watering down whatever you're thinking of doing. So sometimes the lonely path is the way to success. Because if you have the wrong companion, someone who doesn't bear the same vision that you have, they will definitely pull you down because of their own fears. And fear can be contagious. In fact, the English say misery loves company. So yeah, because they are miserable in their situation, they'll pull you down because they do not want you to go ahead of them. And yeah, I agree with that proverb. You'd rather be alone sometimes to make it in life. Yeah.
It's interpretation. It's about to become a thesis.
Ndio.
Eh?
Naona vile
It's like-
imeenda.
Daktari.
Yeah. It's deep, eh?
Sheesh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, people can be vision killers, yeah, sometimes, yeah. There you go.
The United Nations General Assembly is happening,
Yes.
right, in New York. And so this week we're going to see President standing there and speaking. Does it matter?
Thanks. That's a nice question, Latif. It does matter. It matters because when the presidents speak, they'll be pretty much giving us the global, it's like the triage of telling us where the globe is and where the world is in terms of global politics, what the main issues are, what the world is grappling with. So you'll have presidents and if you watch those speeches, if you have the time to watch those speeches, and they can be quite long and, tedious, some will be talking about security issues. Some will be talking about climate issues. A majority of them will be talking about reforms at the UN because they feel, especially from the global south, you'll hear African presidents and the global south talking about how the UN system is not fair to the African countries and to the global south. So there'll be a number of issues, but you can expect peace and security, food security to be issues to be talked about. Definitely the Russian-Ukraine invasion will be feature high on the agenda, Israel-Hamas, the Sudan conflict in Africa. There'll be all those things. And of course, we'll also have what reforms are coming into the UN. Where are we at the reform agenda? How is Africa and the global south being given an equal footing in the United Nations? Because it is a big boys club, truth be told.
Is it anything more than a talk shop?
That's a question my students keep asking me in class. Does the UN work for everyone? That's a better way of asking that question. Truth be told, the UN has, let me use a Swahili statement, iko na wenyewe. The UN has big boys. It's a big boys. There are people who own the system. There are people who control the system. And hence, it will be used to further their agenda. In as much as 193 countries each have an equal vote at the General Assembly, there are some countries that are more equal than others within the United Nations system. And that is the truth. That is a bare naked truth. Yeah, so to an extent, some countries will be allowed to come and vent and others will listen, but there'll be some people who will caucus and decide this is the global agenda and whip people quietly behind the scenes until things are moving in a particular way that they want.
Is this across sectors? Because we're looking at UNGA as, of course, the annual meeting of states.
Yeah.
But what you're saying now is that then, number one, it is a talk shop. And number two, there are those who make the decisions about what the globe is going to do, or how, the trajectory that it's going to take.
Yeah.
So it's a global waste of time?
You can't call it that. It is from the UN General Assembly, and over the years, many resolutions, impactful resolutions have come up and really helped. The fact that the world gets to meet together, remember the whole aim of the United Nations, why it was formed was because number one, it was to avoid world wars, conflict and world wars, exactly. It was a place to try and give us all an equal footing to try and say the world we want to live in and how we want it to be.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it is not a waste of time. The problem comes in when some agendas are sensitive to the interests of some particular powerful countries. Hence, those agendas are slow punctured or they slow down in those debates. Because, for example, let's take just something, let's take reforms at the UN, where the world keeps on saying, why do we have 5 countries holding veto power and literally controlling the fate of the world on so many issues? Why only 5 countries? Why these particular countries? Why can't we open up that space? And so, the other day, the United States of America said, we're willing to allow African countries to have 2 seats at the Security Council, so long as they do not have veto power. The veto power is everything. So if you give us seats at the
So you
Security
can sit
Council...
at the table, but you will not eat the meal.
Exactly.
Right.
Your decisions
You
will
can
not
eat,
have...
but the drumstick is...
yeah.
You can't touch
The
the
neck.
drumstick.
Yeah. The imondo belongs to somebody
Yes.
else. Yeah. So it's those debates. So
it's counterproductive, or it's counterintuitive to what the United Nations in the very first place was formed to create. Because if we were looking, because yes, indeed, it was to stop, because we were coming out of World War I, World War II, and then, the world came together and said, no, come on, guys, we need to be able to have a place where we do kumbaya at a global level, and that we do not have these horrific conflicts that we've seen. But if everybody was supposed to have this neighborhood feel and a place at the table, this now where we say certain people set the agenda, certain nations make the decisions, it's counterproductive to what it was supposed to do in the first place.
Exactly. And that's why you find this global frustration, this wave of global frustration, because countries feel like we will go there, we will vent, we will say whatever it is that we want to say, but are we being listened to? All right? Are our thoughts being taken to account? Are our ideas being taken to account? Why do we have the global north dictating the agenda? Those are some of the debates that are actually outside there. So I will not call it a talk shop. I have not fully given up on it. Mine is just an appeal to, can we have, and I know I'm sounding very idealistic. There's a theory called there's idealism. It's very idealistic to think that the world is equal. All right? That is the place we'd all want to be at. But the truth of the matter is there are global powers out there that dictate the agenda. And unless things are flowing in their direction, they will pretty much, every once in a while, without telling you to your face, slow down the debate or derail the debate. And you will speak and not get to the promised land that you're really looking forward to getting. Yeah.
Let's look at the situation in the globe right now.
Yeah.
Okay? So in Europe, they have a conflict.
Exactly.
Russia, Ukraine. In the Middle East, there's that conflict that's going on there. In Africa, we have our conflicts. West Africa, we have issues. The Horn of Africa, we have issues. We have issues around us.
Yeah.
Now, are those crises being treated equally? Are they being looked at equally in the lens of the United Nations?
Thank you. In theory, all conflicts should be treated equally, in theory. In practice, we have seen something different. And I'll give you an example. Africa has been suffering from a food crisis, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Now, because of the dire need and the food insecurity Africa has been facing for a long time, when the Russian-Ukraine conflict broke out, a lot of aid that was coming towards Africa started getting diverted towards that conflict, almost showing us that some conflicts are more equal than others. All right? Why the Russian-Ukraine conflict is given a higher preeminence, so to speak, is because of the ripple effects and the global shocks it sends. Russia invades Ukraine, fuel prices of the world go up. We get a food crisis of global proportions all over the world. So we have prices of wheat, soya, fertilizer, shocks all over the world.
Energy crisis.
The energy crisis and all those things. Now Europe gets into an energy crisis. Now Putin, because the European Union is supporting Ukraine, he turns off the gas taps to Europe. So you will find, the world naturally realizes the Russia-Ukraine conflict probably has a bigger impact in the global food chain, the global energy chain, as opposed to a conflict in Africa. And not at the risk of sounding like I'm demeaning it, and I am not. The conflict in Sudan, global powers ask, who is that affecting? Okay, it's creating a refugee crisis in Africa, in the Horn of Africa. But other than that, who else is it affecting? So when they tick those boxes and realize we are still buying and selling, our stock markets are still operating, it will not be given the same attention as the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A conflict in the Middle East, if, for example, the Israel-Hamas conflict spills outside the borders, the Middle East, what is it known for? Oil. That is another energy crisis the world is looking at. So you'll find, unfortunately, because of some of the geopolitics around this conflict, some conflicts will be ranked higher, or they'll be deemed to be a little bit more important than others because of what the repercussions the world is going to feel. And that is just the way it is. Lives are lives, they're all important, but granted, because of the effects to global powers and the world economy. Some parts of the world, if they're in problems, the world really suffers. And that's why I think in the global order and hierarchy of which conflicts are more important, you'll find those ones, a lot of attention being drawn to and a lot of discussions going into trying to stop some of those conflicts.
But don't we see that the real issue here, Doc, is that the conflicts whereby the world's leading powers would have some kind of influence of interest
Exactly.
is the ones that would get some attention.
Correct. You're very right. Now, for the Security Council, let's look at the Security Council. And that's a very nice question, too. Because for some agendas to be discussed at the Security Council, they must have the backing of these global powers. Otherwise, your agenda never sees the day. So imagine where you need to get your problem sorted out, and the people who are deciding what we are going to discuss, we are going to solve, let's say, 5 problems per day. If these global powers do not feel your problem touches any of your interests at any given time, it doesn't get airtime.
Or their interest, for that
Exactly.
matter.
That's the thing. So it doesn't get airtime. And this is now why people have been clamoring for reforms at the United Nations. We want reforms. We want to have an equal voice. We want all agendas to be equal. We want all parts of the world to be viewed as equal. Yeah, whatever problems are occurring in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia Pacific, they should be equal to what's happening in Europe, in Southeast Europe, in Eastern Europe. That is basically the call.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's unrealistic, isn't it? Like we just said earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unrealistic to expect that they're going to be treated the same way.
You're right, Latif, to an extent. But if we push, and I'll introduce a new angle, if we push, for example, let me take the African scenario. Africa has realized it has one big asset. Other than our minerals, other than our raw resources, the African vote, the 54 votes we have at the UN, 55 votes that we have at the UN, is now something that these global powers have discovered. Hey, we need those votes. So you'll have the Russia-Africa Summit, China-Africa Summit. We have now all these big powers, Italy-Africa Summit. Now they have realized if we can try and get Africa to back our agenda in global politics. So now we've now become what do we call? We've become we've become nice brides who can be wooed now.
But you see, now that's where the problem again comes. That everybody can see the power of the 54, and the 54 can't see the power of the 54.
Of the 54.
Thank you.
See, that was actually going to be something I was going to touch on.
Yeah.
That when the United Nations came into being, 45, 46, that everybody was, again, having a flower moment, kumbaya, yes, the world has come together and we form now this club where we can all come and discuss things. And, then we developed a little bit more, and then we started to see conversations about regional bodies coming together, whether you had NATO or OAU or the EU, things like that started coming into conversation. We didn't really have pushback to what many would call a pretentious way of global politics that was now embedded in the UN. We didn't really have pushback to that because people were still dazzled by this new shiny toy that was this group where you could all come to New York, the New York address every now and then.
Yeah.
We started to see the pushback when it was very clear that some kind of state sovereignty was something you could discuss at whatever level. When countries gained their independence and started to see that you could actually build and make and do for yourself, is when we started to see pushback to some of the things that you're talking about and started to push for reforms at the United Nations. So now when nations see that actually we can make a difference, why do we then not see that pushback comes on a glaring level? If 54 African nations are not able, for example, to see the power that they have to not sit at the table, for goodness sake, create their own table that would do much more for this kind of negotiation that we see that happens at UNGA in New York every year.
Yeah.
Are we really playing in global politics, or are we sitting in the audience watching these guys play?
Beautiful question. Remember, when the UN is being formed, African countries are colonies. We're still colonies. So when they are dividing the cake and setting out the agenda, we do not feature. The UN helped African countries to become independent eventually. Of course, it clamored for that. And African states became independent. But we became independent and came to the table to be told, this is the way things are done. This is how it is. Welcome to this club. These are the rules
of the club.
These are the rules of the club. You're the newest member.
So to sit in the corner and
sit there and first learn. And then you've mentioned something called state sovereignty. I'll add something else, state interest. one of the biggest problems with African countries, I would say, is our lack of unity. Even though we have the African Union, we do not allow the African Union to speak for us. You still have African states that want to chart their own agenda, almost independent of the African Union. And I'll give you a good example, and at the risk of some people throwing stones at me later on, I thought there was a gentleman's agreement, or there's been a push in the African Union that so that African can negotiate from a position of strength, why don't we allow the AU to represent African states in some of these big dealings? But guess what? When Russia calls Russia-Africa Summit, 17 presidents quietly, others say, African Union represent us, 17 say, no, I will go and represent myself. So why can't we all be united? Why can't Africans be united? Gaddafi tried to unite Africa, and
but
he paid a price for it.
Funds the AU, let's be honest here.
Yeah, the European Union.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right now, even looking at, we can't even fund our own thing that was supposed to come out to be a representation of the continent.
Yeah.
Can we really then depend on that same body
That's it.
to represent us if we can't even fund it for ourselves?
So the question becomes, African countries want to be members of the African Union. They don't want to pay the subscription fees. You do not want to pay. You do not want to fund it and make it strong to give it teeth in global politics. How else then are you going to, how else is it going to stand and fight these other big powers? The African Union is funded by a little subscription, the European Union, well-wishers like China, the US, and if they do it, they will dictate your agenda. They will dictate your agenda. So
then when we go to UNGA, when you go to UNGA, like you will in the next couple of days, the agenda set on the table, you're not going to have a say, really, in terms of what's going to be decided.
Yeah, it will be big politics, what we call high politics, military issues, of course, the global wars, climate change, and Africa's voice, of course, like right now, Africa is really clamoring for climate financing. It's talking about we should reform the World Bank and IMF and get loans at cheaper interest rates and all that. But, hey, we'll be like, get your act together. It's our money. We are the ones who are contributing the money. Countries like the US contribute between, on average, 15 to 20% of the UN budget. So that country has a lot of power within the UN system. If they withdraw their funding, like Trump had threatened to do some years ago, the UN feels the jitters.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's take a break. It's coming up to 9:30. Our guest this morning is Dr. Edgar Githua. He is an international relations, peace and conflict researcher, as well as a security analyst. The United Nations General Assembly presidents are meeting in New York today and tomorrow and this week. How neutrality can lead to economic and humanitarian crises in Africa. We are seeing all these crises, and how is the world addressing them? Is it addressing them the same way? For example, the world's largest humanitarian crisis right now is right here.
Just both of you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, let's
Get the football you want and get it all on DSTV.